What's up, everybody? Welcome to Gustin Time. I'm your host, James. As always, I've been away for a while, and there's a few reasons for that. Number one, we had Snowpocalypse 2023 out here. Got 2 feet of snow in one day. I was out without power, without internet for, a couple days. Everything went fine, though. That was the first thing that happened. Then I went to see Static X and Mushroom Head and Dope and Fear Factory in Boston. So that caused me to be away for a little bit. I got sick. Had some kind of a cold thing going on. Still kind of got it. You can kind of hear it there. And I got a new job. So I've been kind of busy. Also had this shirt made. Pretty neat. So yeah, that's why I've been away. I want to talk about something that happened during Snowpocalypse 2023 that was kind of funny. Good buddy of mine, Steve, happened to be in Greenville, New Hampshire, and they were without power for a while. And he saw one of the coolest things I've ever heard of. He saw a lady speaking in tongues, shaking a tuning fork at the power lines. Yeah, I know. Kind of funny. But what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about where I grew up. Okay? If you guys follow this stuff on the History Channel, you've seen that there's a new new season of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch that's going to be coming out later this month. Just so happens it's going to be on my dad's birthday, April 18th, on the History Channel. We're not sponsored, but let me tell you a little bit about that show. So, I know a lot about the Skinwalker Ranch. I've been reading about it for a long time. I know about the Shermans. I know about Robert Bigelow and the Nids. Robert Bigelow has probably spent more money than any human on the planet trying to figure out what's going on with UFOs and all that shit. I do like the show, and I do have reservations. Let me tell you why I like it. So they have Dr. Travis Taylor on the show. He's the expert of the show, let's say. He's from Georgia, so he's got this really thick accent. But I respect Dr. Travis Taylor, and let me tell you why. Dr. Travis Taylor was in charge of ATIP. No, not ATIP. He's in charge of the US UAP task force, the thing that came after ATIP. So the UAP task force is government-sponsored. They're trying to figure out what the fuck is flying around in the sky. Dr. Travis Taylor has a PhD in astrophysics, so he's not stupid, okay? Yeah, he sounds like a hillbilly from Georgia, but the man is smart. And he doesn't just go straight into believing that everything's aliens from another planet. He's a smart guy. He thinks critically, and I'm a fan. So why are we talking about Skinwalker Ranch? Well, if you don't know what Skinwalker Ranch is a ranch in northern Utah that is famous for cattle mutilations, UFO sightings, portals opening up, orbs. There was a Bigfoot seen there, Wolfman, all kinds of crazy shit. That's really interesting to me because where I grew up in the San Luis Valley is pretty much a really big version of the Skinwalker Ranch. I grew up in the San Luis Valley in Colorado. I was born in Alamosa. I was raised in rural Saguache County. And yeah, it's safe to say that I have seen my fair share of weird shit out there. The first time I ever saw a UFO, I don't remember exactly how old I was. I was less than 10 years old when I saw it. I was laying in my bed at night, and I had this window facing to the west. I had a pretty good view of the La Garita Mountains behind my parents' house. I was laying there, just, couldn't sleep. I don't know what time it was. It had to be like 10 o'clock at night or something. And I saw this thing slowly moving down out of the sky. I don't know what it was. It was kind of like an ellipsis shape, kind of like a weird pointy oval, and it had 6 lights on it. And it was definitely not falling. It wasn't swaying, so it wasn't coming down via parachute. It was just gently floating down out of the sky. And I was fucking terrified. I was so scared I couldn't move. I was paralyzed just staring at it. And I'd move my eyes away, and then I'd look back at it. And every time that I looked back at it, one of the lights would flash. It would get brighter at me. There were 6 lights on it. They were all different colors. There was red, yellow, blue, green, indigo, and violet. All of the colors of the rainbow. So after it landed, I guess you want to say that, I jumped out of bed and ran into my parents' room screaming about UFOs and aliens. They were watching Northern Exposure. So clearly this was in the early to mid 90s. And they told me I had a bad dream to go back to bed and go back to sleep, and everything was okay. I did. I didn't get much sleep that night. But the next morning, my dad ran his own business, and the guy that worked for him came over to the house, get ready to go to work. And he walks in, and he says, "Hey, did you guys hear about the thing that the Del Norte police were chasing last night?" And the blood drained out of all of our faces. And the guy's name was Mark, and he said, "Yeah, the Del Norte Police Department apparently chased a circle of lights for 2.5 hours last night." And I looked at my mom and dad, and I said, "See, I told you, I saw it land in the backyard." There was never any explanation for it. No one knows what it was to this day. It wasn't flares, so it wasn't. They weren't on fire. Okay, they were different colored lights. They didn't move away from each other or anything. Just kind of floated down out of the sky and landed. When it landed, all the lights went off. So that's the first time I ever saw a UFO. And from that moment on, I kind of got obsessed. I wanted to know what the hell I saw. And the more that I think about it, and the more I read about it and study about it and learn about it, the less of an idea I actually have what it was. I don't have any reason to believe that it was aliens. I don't know what it was. It could have been some secret government thing. Somebody could have dropped something out of a plane. This was well before consumer drones were a thing. In fact, I don't think we knew about military drones back then. Yeah, it was crazy. But that's the first thing that got me interested in all this weird shit that I like to talk about. Now, there are other things that I've seen, and we'll get into those some other time. But that's just one thing that happens in the San Luis Valley. Where I lived, there's a canyon called Penitente Canyon. It's right behind my parents' house. And that is where a bunch of religious people would go and pay penance for their sins. They were called the Penitente people. They would flog each other and flog themselves to repent for their sins. And just 2 canyons over from that is probably the strangest canyon I've ever been in my entire life. And that canyon's called Witch Canyon. Witch Canyon is full of crazy shit. There's been reports of portals, Bigfoot, dogmen, orbs, UFO sightings, all kinds of crazy shit. In fact, the whole thing is weird. I went camping up there with a couple of friends of mine. If you guys are watching and or listening, what's up, Angelique? And, that's, we went there. And, and Nick. Don't want to forget Nick. Anyway, we had a fun time, but the acoustics in that canyon are very strange. And the people that live in the valley are kind of strange sometimes, too. So we were, we set up our tents. We were just hanging out, having a couple beers, whatever. And somebody was flying an ultralight aircraft at night out there. And we saw it. We saw the light, just kind of slowly moving across. But the thing about being in that canyon is it took quite a while for the sound to catch up. So we could see it. It was probably about halfway across the canyon before we even heard the engine. So we started to freak out a little bit. And then I heard the sound, and I'm like, oh, that's just my neighbor who has an ultralight aircraft. He's just flying it around at night for some reason. People do that out there. Takes all kinds. But that night, if I remember correctly, my friend Angelique had this really weird dream while we were camping out there about UFOs or aliens or something. It's been a few years. God, it's been a lot of years. Probably almost a decade now since that night. But other things that happen out there is cryptid sightings. One of them happened pretty recently, and it happened to my sister. So my sister works about 50 miles away from where she lives. Coming home one night, she was almost home. There's this one tree by the side of the road there. It's called the Lone Tree for obvious reasons. And she was about there when she saw something on all fours jump the fence and start running across the highway, which isn't strange. There's wildlife out there all over the place. And here's where it gets weird, though. It got to the road, and it stood up on its hind legs and was probably 7 or 8 feet tall and took 2 steps across a 2-lane highway. It looked at her. She said it had green glowing eyes, had long, dark brown or gray hair, and it didn't look like a Bigfoot. It kind of, I guess, looked like a dog man. I don't know. She didn't get a real good look at it, but she told me about it the next day, and that, I don't know. I believe my sister. She's seen some weird shit out there too. So that's just some of my experiences. Another one was my sister saw a ghost when she was 2 years old. Now, you can take that with a grain of salt if you want, but here's where it gets weird. So the ghost that my sister saw was the ghost of a man that she never met. And that ghost of the man she never met was one of my dad's best friends, who was murdered in the hills behind our house. He was supposed to help my dad build the house, and he didn't show up one day, and that's because he was dead. So a couple years later, we're living in that house, and my sister, we're eating lunch. She's eating SpaghettiOs or some shit, and her eyes get huge. I remember it. I was 4. And she goes, Daddy, there's a man in the hallway. And we all look. There's nobody in the hallway. But she says, no, Daddy, there's a man in the hallway. And my dad asked her to describe what he looked like. So she described him, and my dad got freaked out. He went upstairs, and he got a picture of his friend Phil. He brought it back down, and he said, is this the man you saw in the hallway? She says, yeah, Daddy, that's him. He waved at me. Yeah. So that's another little bit of a weird thing that goes on there. There's also the legend of La Llorona down there. If you're familiar with Spanish Mexican culture, you know what La Llorona is. If you're not, La Llorona is the spirit of a woman who drowned her children in the river. And now she walks the riverbanks and lures children to their death. Crazy shit, right? There's also been reports of orbs, portals, Bigfoot, all kinds of crazy shit out there. And this is where I grew up. So when you spend most of your life surrounded by shit like that, you end up like me. You want to know what it is. And we don't know. And honestly, I don't think we're ever going to know. unless we figure out how to get to wherever this shit is coming from. There's a lot of theories about it out there. I think my favorite theory is that it's coming from a parallel dimension. There is a book called The Trickster and the Paranormal, written by George P. Hansen, one of my favorite books of all time. And this is what he talks about in there a little bit. It's a massive book. He talks about all kinds of stuff. Highly recommend it. It's the only thing that I can think of that makes sense at this point. But, as we all know, science is constantly changing and we're always learning. So what makes sense today could probably not make sense tomorrow. So yeah, that's the parallels between where I grew up in the San Luis Valley and Skinwalker Ranch. The really only difference is San Luis Valley is a lot bigger. A lot bigger. It is the largest alpine valley in the world. It's got the Great Sand Dunes National Park in it, which is another fucking weird anomaly. You have like 5 different climate zones in the valley, from desert to alpine forest to glaciers. There's swamps. Just any kind of habitat that you can think of is in the valley. Another weird part about the San Luis Valley is there's an alligator farm. Yeah. There's an alligator farm in Colorado in the San Luis Valley. It's not your run-of-the-mill alligator farm. This is pretty much a retirement home for famous alligators and reptiles and all that shit. So the gator from Happy Gilmore, he lives there. They have one of the only albino alligators in the world there. There's all kinds of snakes and other reptiles and shit. And you may be thinking to yourself, doesn't it get cold in Colorado? How do these guys stay warm? Well, natural hot springs. Yep. Thermal water bubbling up from the ground. That's how these alligators stay warm in the water in the San Luis Valley. And there's also the UFO watchtower. Yeah, there's a UFO watchtower out there. You've probably heard of Dr. Stephen Greer, if you're into UFOs. Dr. Greer has held some of his, trainings out there. He says he can call UFOs in with his mind. I don't believe it. I'm not exactly the biggest supporter of Dr. Stephen Greer. But, I'm not a big fan of anybody who does this for money. I don't want to do this for money. I've spent countless hours looking into this, talking to people on the phone, going out and trying to figure out what these people saw. I never charged a dime for it because that's not what this is about. I don't care. I don't want a TV contract. I don't want my own show. I'm perfectly content just sitting here and talking to you guys about it on a podcast. Why? Because it's interesting to me, and I think we all need to exercise our minds a little bit. If you sit and think about it for not very long at all, you're probably going to become curious about all this stuff. So I think going forward with the podcast, that's pretty much what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about weird shit. UFOs, Bigfoot, alien, the occult, all that stuff. Ghosts, poltergeists, all that stuff. Probably going to talk about some science, too. Some theoretical physics, some quantum physics. Quantum physics is so goddamn confusing. We know so little about it, and none of it makes sense. But this stuff fascinates me, and if it fascinates you, keep listening to the podcast, because I'm going to talk a lot about it. Yeah, I guess I'm gonna wrap this one up. I know it's been a while. I'm gonna try and be better at getting this stuff out a little more frequently on a little bit better schedule. But like I said, I just got a new job, so that's gonna take a lot of my time up. I don't know what my schedule is gonna be. I got hired today, so yay me. But until the next time, I will see you in time. Gustin time, that is.